All right, y'all, so we are going on to lesson 3.2, which is this one that says rational equations. But before we do that, we need to do a little bit of review. So you should have this worksheet. If you don't, go ahead and pause the video, make sure you've got this worksheet, and we're going to talk about decimal operations. We've done a lot of stuff with fractions, but we haven't done a lot of stuff with decimals. So go ahead and pause it, make sure everybody has this worksheet, and then when you're ready, turn it back on. All right, so here's what we have. We have two numbers that we're adding together. So if we're adding or we're subtracting, the key to these is we have to line up the decimals. You have to line up the decimals before you can do the work. So what I have here is 8.78, and I'm going to add 6.2. So this decimal just comes on down. I can just bring it on down, nothing changes. Okay, I can put a placeholder 0 here if I want to, but I don't have to. I just know 8 plus nothing is going to be 8. And 7 plus 2 is 9, and 8 plus 6 is 14. So my answer, my decimal is kind of in the sky here, but my answer is 14.98. Okay, so again, it's the same thing with subtraction. So for adding and subtraction, I have to line up my decimals. So I end up with 21.9, and I have 4.5. Now, what's nice about this is everything lines up again. Okay, you're going to see when we get to number 4, that's not quite the case. So I have 9 minus 5, which is 4. And then if you need to borrow here, this would come to 11. So 11 minus 4 is 7, and I have 1 left. Okay? All right, so with multiplying, we do not line up decimals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this out with the smallest number of digits on the bottom. So I'm going to have 7.2 on the top and 5 on the bottom, and I'm going to just multiply this out. Okay, so I have 5 times 2, which is 10, and then 35, 7 times 5 is 35, plus 1 is 36. So that's my number, 360. So then, after you do your multiplication, you're going to move the decimal by the values to the right of the original. All right, so here's what this means. I have no decimal places here. There's none on the 5, no decimal places. Here, I have 1, just the 0.2. So 1 plus nothing is 1. So I'm going to take this number, 360, and I have this imaginary decimal point right here, right? So after the number is where I have this imaginary decimal point, and I'm going to move it 1 digit because I only have 1 to the right of the decimal place. So I'm going to move it 1 digit. So my answer here is 36, or you can say 36.0. Those two things are the same. Okay? All right, so let's look at this division now, because division is also something that's not quite as easy as addition and subtraction. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite this with a fraction bar. So I have 7.86 divided by 0.2. And now we have Norma and the donkey. So what I can do is I put my donkey outside, and on the inside I have 7.86. Now we cannot do this. So after you set this up, you have to move the decimal before division. Okay, so here's what this means. I have to move the decimal. I have this decimal placed right here, so I'm going to move it this direction by 1. So that means I have to move it this direction by 1. So what I end up with is a whole new problem, and I would recommend you always write this out. My new problem is 2 divided into 78.6. All right, so once we have this moved, the next step is going to be place the decimal. And what this means is the decimal moves up, and I put the decimal right there before I do any division. I have to move that decimal. So now 2 goes into 7 3 times. 2 goes into 18 9 times. I bring down the 6. 2 goes into 6 3 times. So my answer is 39.3. Okay, so here's my answer right here. Kind of hard to see. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I've left you with the harder ones. And so I want you to pause the video and work the even problems. We are not, right now all we're doing is working on decimal operations, so we're not working on this part on the bottom. So just work 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, so I started these. I'm going to go through these really quick so that we can see final answers. The first one was easy. Hopefully you lined it all up. You got 55.39. With the second one, we end up with a 46. So when I line up my decimal places, remember 46 is really the same as 46 with a decimal place right after it. I have to put these two placeholders. So that means I have to borrow to subtract. So what I'm really borrowing from is the 6. So the 6 has to become a 5, which means this becomes a 9, which means this becomes a 10. Right? So you have to have these placeholders for you to be able to subtract. So you add the zeros. So when I subtract now, I get 7, 3. I should have brought my decimal point down, 2, and 4. That's my final answer. Okay? All right, with number 6, when you do the multiplication for this, you should have ended up with 663. That should have been the answer that you got it with. So now let's look at decimal places. So I have 2 to the right of this decimal places. So this is 2, and I have 1 to the right on this one. It's 1. So 2 plus 1 is 3. So if I have 663, and this is where my decimal place was, right? This is my final answer. I need to move it 3 places. So 1, 2, 3. So my final answer is 0.663. Okay? All right, so let's look at the division problem. So with this division problem, here's what I have. So I had 0.05. So remember, the first step is to move the decimal place. So I have to move it 2 places. Well, I don't have 2 places to move it. If I move it to the 5, that's 1 place. So I had to add an extra 0. Right? So let me do this over here. I have 0.05, and this goes into 9.5. So if I move it 2 places, 1, 2, I have to move it 2 places here. 1, 2. So I have to add an extra 0. So this is what it looks like. Now remember, with decimal, you have to place the decimal. Or sorry, with division, you have to place the decimal. So I have this division, this decimal goes to the end of my number, and now I can divide it in. So 5 goes into 9 once, and I'm left with 45. 5 goes into 45 9 times. I have 45, but I'm not done because I already have the 0 here. So I have to bring this 0 down, and 5 goes into 0 0 times. So my answer here would be 190. Okay? So I know I went through this really quick. Please come to a help session if you are struggling with decimal operations. And here's why. So go ahead and pause the video and go back to your notebook. Put this in your notebook, right? So you've got a reference. It's hole punched for you. And go back to 3.2 in your notebook. Okay. So 3.2 is the pre-algebra version of what we did in 3.1. So what I did with you a minute ago on 3.1 was pretty much exactly what you did in Math 7. You've done this before. Actually, it starts back in 6th grade. You've done this. But now what we're doing is we're adding decimals and fractions, rational numbers. We know what rational numbers are. So if we go back up here, we know that a rational number can be a decimal, it can be a fraction, and it can be a whole number. So now when you solve equations, it can be any of these, decimals, fractions, and whole numbers. They can be positive, they can be negative. So our order of operations, our steps are exactly the same. So that's what this says. Sorry, I keep moving this up. Sorry, y'all. So steps to solve the equation with decimals or fractions is exactly the same. You're going to find the variable. You're going to look at the operation tied to the variable, so on the same side is the variable, and then you're going to use the inverse operation. Okay? So We are not going to work through all of these. I'm going to work a couple of them, and then I'm going to work a couple fraction problems, and then I'm going to let you practice this, because really that's kind of what this is all about, is just doing the math. And this is without a calculator, y'all. So on number 1, I'm subtracting 17.9. So what I have to do here is add 17.9. Get a piece of scrap paper if this is not big enough for you. This is really probably not big enough for me. So I would have 32.4. Remember, when I'm doing addition, I have to line up my decimal place. So I bring my decimal down. So I end up here with A equal to 50.3. All right, so if we look at problem number 3, I'm multiplying. So the operation that happens on the same side as the variable, these are connected, so I'm multiplying. The opposite of multiplication is division, so I'm dividing by a negative 4.5. So over here I divide by a negative 4.5. Well, what I'm going to identify right away is I have a negative on the top and I have a negative on the bottom. So because I have that negative and negative, I know my answer is going to be positive, okay? So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to write it, and I have 4.5, and this is going to divide into 60.3. So remember, step 1 is to move this decimal. So I move it 1 to the right here, 1 to the right here. So I'm going to rewrite it as 45 into 603 with a decimal at the end. Okay, so 45 goes into 60 one time, so this would be 45. If I subtract this, I get 153. So 45 goes into that 3 times, so this is 15, 13. And if I subtract this, I get 1, hold on, 80. Which means that's going to be 4. So 20, 80. So here I have P equals 13.4. Now I'm going to caution you on these, right? So you have to be solid with this long division. That's why we did so much of it in Unit 1. You've got to be solid. And here, the first thing I did was identify negative, negative, so I knew my answer was going to be positive. If you have a negative and a positive, identify that first so you know you can go down here and say P equals, and just put your negative in so you don't forget it, right? Let's see, let me do one more. I'm going to do number 9. So on this side of the equation, I'm subtracting, so I'm going to add 4.49. So over here, I'm going to add 4.49, okay? So what I notice is I have 1 is subtraction and 1 is addition. So the signs are opposite. If the signs are opposite, I have to subtract. So when you subtract, the bigger number has to go on the top. So I have 8.01 and 4.49. So everything lines up nicely. I'm going to subtract this. So I can't subtract 9 from 1. So I have to borrow. So I'm borrowing here, which means I really have to borrow here. So 9 minus 11 is 2. This is a 5. My decimal point comes down, and then I end up with a 3. So I get P equals 3.52. The problem is I'm going to go back to my original equation. The bigger number is the 8, and the 8 is negative, so this is going to be a negative 3.52. Okay? All right, so go ahead and flip it over. And we're going to talk about fractions. So we've done fractions. We've done a lot of stuff with fractions. They don't go away. And so the operations are exactly the same. You know what to do with fractions. I'm going to put this here. So if you add or subtract, what you have to have is a common denominator. That hasn't gone away. Okay? So on this one, I'm adding 1/4, so that means I have to subtract 1/4. So that means I'm subtracting 1/4 over here. All right, so n equals 5 over 6 and 1/4. So my common denominator is going to be 12. So this gives me 10 over 12. And this is going to give me negative 3 over 12. So if you're like, where in the world did that come from? So this is a positive number, so this is a positive number. So to get 12, I multiply the top and the bottom by 2. So 10 and 12. This is a negative 1/4. That's where this negative comes from. So I multiply the top and the bottom by 3 to get 12. So now I have 10 minus 3. So 7/12. Okay? All right, last thing down here. And we've done this over and over. It doesn't change. So to divide by a fraction, we are going to multiply by the reciprocal. And if you remember, what is the reciprocal? The reciprocal is just flip. It is not keep, change, change. It is just flipping the fraction. So let's look at what this looks like. So here I have 2/3 connected to the x. So I'm multiplying. So technically, let me do this over here. Technically what I need to do is divide by 2/3. Well, if I'm dividing by 2/3, what I'm really going to do is multiply by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply this side by 3 over 2, and I'm going to multiply this side by 3 over 2. So if I cross divide, this all cancels out, and I end up with just x. Now, at this point, I could multiply across the top and multiply across the bottom. And remember, this is this implied 1 right here to make it a fraction. But we want to reduce first. So I'm going to cross divide. This is even, and this is 2. So really what I have here is 24 over 1 times 3 over 1. Because I divide this side by 2, and I divide this by 2, and this is what I end up with. So now when I multiply across the top, I have 24 times 3, which is 72. Okay, let me do one more. Let me do one with a negative number. I guess, let me do 21 because it's 2 fractions. So again, this is the side that's connected. This is the side I have to move. So I'm going to multiply by 3 over 2. 3 over 2 is the reciprocal. So 3 divided by 3 and 2 divided by 2, that all cancels out, and I get 1. So on this side, I have to multiply by 3 over 2. Now, this one's tricky because I've got this negative out here. So I'm going to rewrite this because I don't like it. So I have negative 4 over 9 times 3 over 2. Okay, so now I'm going to cross divide. So with this part of the fraction, 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 9 divided by 3 is 3. And now I can do it this way. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. So now, if I multiply across the top, I get negative 2, and if I multiply across the bottom, I get 3. Okay, you are going to spend the rest of the class working on this worksheet. And so what I want you to do is focus on just the even problems. There are a lot of problems on here. Go back to the decimal side and work on the even problems. And then in a few minutes, you can switch it over and you can look at the fraction side. So go ahead and pause the video now. And then here in a few minutes when you're ready to check your answers on the decimals, you can unpause and then pause it again and then check again for the fractions. Okay? Okay, everybody, here are the answers for the decimal side. So go ahead and pause it, look through it a little bit, highlight the ones that you missed so you know how to go back and check them. And remember, don't forget the answer key's posted. So if this is going too fast and you need to do work at home to check this, then go back and check your answers online at home. All right, go ahead and pause it again and then work on the even problems for the fractions. Okay, so I'm kind of expecting to see a few more problems on this because the numbers are bigger, right? So with 14, we had a mixed number that you had to convert. With 16, we had 2 mixed numbers that we had to convert. So look at your answers on this. So this is a little tricky, but this is 4 5/8. Remember, you don't have to convert this to a mixed number. You can leave it as an improper fraction. No problem with that. Don't forget the negative on 16. Okay? Highlight those if they're wrong and go back and fix them. All right, then down here below is the multiplication division. Okay. Come see me at Help Session if you're struggling with this. Your homework is practicing just the rational part.